Marcus Reid stood in the marble lobby of Castellano Ashford Sports Medicine Center, the $6.8 million facility he now owned the master lease to, though the doctors whose names hung on the building had no idea. Dr. Simone Ashford, his ex-wife, stepped out of the elevator in surgical scrubs, face pale beneath expensive highlights. Behind her, Dr. Dominic Castellano, the man who'd replaced Marcus in his children's lives 5 years ago. "Marcus, what are you doing here? This is a private medical facility." Marcus held up a single document. "I'm the new landlord, Simone. As of midnight, Talbot Holdings purchased the building lease, the equipment financing, and the $3.1 million line of credit keeping this place operational." What Simone didn't know, Marcus was Talbot Holdings. The dock supervisor she'd divorced for being stuck in a working-class mindset now controlled $52 million in medical debt across the Southeast, including every loan her practice had taken out. What Dominic didn't know, Marcus had documented evidence of the botched surgery they'd covered up 14 months ago. Brandon Garrett, former college linebacker, now permanently disabled because Dominic rushed through a knee replacement to make his daughter's dance recital. In 4 days, State Medical Board would revoke both licenses. In 1 week, federal prosecutors would file conspiracy charges. But to understand how a black man from Mechanicsville became the silent architect who dismantled a surgeon's empire using nothing but ledgers and patience, we need to go back to April 2013 to a hospital cafeteria at 1:30 in the morning, where two people hungry for something better first found each other. Marcus was 26 then, port operations manager at the Savannah docks, pulling $54,000 a year. He wore the same Carhartt jacket every shift, drove a 1998 Toyota Tacoma with 200,000 miles on it, and lived in a studio apartment in East Atlanta where the heat worked 3 days out of 7. Nights after his shift ended, he'd drive straight to Georgia State's continuing education building for business administration classes. The professors never asked why he smelled like diesel fuel and ocean salt. They just marked him present. Simone was 24, pre-med senior at Emory on a full academic scholarship. Her father had been a postal worker in rural Georgia until a stroke took him when she was 16. Her mother cleaned houses in Buckhead 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. Simone studied with the kind of desperation that comes from watching your mother's hands bleed from bleach, and knowing you'd do anything to avoid inheriting those scars. Marcus had driven to Grady Memorial that night because his co-worker Darnell had gotten his hand crushed between 2 shipping containers. The emergency room was chaos. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, a woman in labor screaming in Spanish. Marcus sat in the waiting area for 3 hours before a nurse told him Darnell was in surgery and wouldn't be out until morning. He wandered to the cafeteria more out of restlessness than hunger. That's where he found Simone alone at a corner table surrounded by 7 organic chemistry textbooks and 3 empty Red Bull cans. She was crying quietly, the kind of tears that come when you're too exhausted to care who sees. Marcus bought 2 coffees from the vending machine, walked over, set one down in front of her without asking. "Studying or punishing yourself? Because from here it looks the same." She looked up, eyes red-rimmed, defensive. "Who are you?" "Someone who recognizes the look of a person running on fumes and spite." "That corner over there's quieter. Better lighting, too." She studied him for a long moment. The oil-stained jeans, the work boots, the genuine kindness in his face that came from someone who'd also fought for every inch of ground he stood on. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it, and because you look like you're carrying the weight of 10 people's dreams, and that's too heavy for one set of shoulders." They talked until 4 in the morning. She told him about failing her practice exam, about the crushing pressure of being the first person in her family to attend college, about the suffocating fear that she wasn't smart enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't enough, period. He told her about working the docks since he was 19, about the night classes he'd been taking for 7 years to finish a degree 1 course at a time, about wanting to own something real that no bank or boss could ever take away. 6 weeks later, they were dating. The chemistry was immediate and real. Two people who understood hunger, who respected the grind, who saw in each other a partner rather than a project. Simone appreciated that Marcus never pitied her poverty or treated her ambition like a character flaw. Marcus admired her refusal to accept the limitations the world had tried to assign her. Their first real meal together was at Krog Street Market on a Saturday afternoon in May. Marcus had worked a double shift to afford it. $47 for 2 sandwiches and drinks felt like a fortune then. Simone ordered the cheapest thing on the menu out of habit, and Marcus gently pushed the menu back toward her with a smile that carried no judgment. Get what you actually want. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? You existing, me existing, us finding each other in a city of 5 million people. That feels worth celebrating. She got the salmon. He got the brisket. They shared fries and talked about the future in that way young people do when the future still feels like a promise instead of a threat. She wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon specializing in sports medicine, wanted to fix the bodies of athletes who'd sacrificed everything for a dream only to have it stolen by injury. He wanted to own commercial real estate, wanted to be the landlord instead of the tenant, wanted his kids to grow up never wondering if the heat would work in winter. You and me, Marcus, we're going to build an empire. You handle the foundation, I'll handle the vision. Together we're unstoppable. He believed her. God help him, he believed every word. February 2015, 2 months after Simone received her acceptance letter to Emory School of Medicine, Marcus proposed. He'd worked triple overtime for 8 weeks straight. Sunrise to midnight, 7 days a week, every holiday, every birthday, every moment he wasn't actively unconscious. The savings account hit $2,800, and he walked into a jewelry store in Little 5 Points run by an older black woman who took one look at his calloused hands and rough clothes and asked what he was celebrating. Getting ready to ask the love of my life to marry me. What's her birthstone? Garnet. She was born in January. The woman pulled out a vintage ring, delicate silver band with a small garnet stone surrounded by tiny diamonds. This one's been waiting for someone who'll appreciate it. Not the biggest, not the flashiest, but it's got history. It's got meaning. That matter to you? Marcus held it up to the light, imagined it on Simone's finger. How much? For you? $2,800 even. And that includes the box and the blessing of an old woman who's been married 43 years and knows love when she sees it. He proposed at Krog Street Market, same spot where they'd had their first real meal together. Got down on one knee right there by the food stalls. Didn't care about the tourists with their phones out recording. Didn't care about the hipsters smirking at his Goodwill suit. All he cared about was the way Simone's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with exhaustion or fear and everything to do with joy. Yes, God, yes, you and me, baby, we're going to build something beautiful together. The wedding was small, 40 people in the backyard of Simone's mother's rental house in Decatur, a minister from the AME church where Marcus's grandmother had taken him as a child. Chicken and mac and cheese from a soul food place on Memorial Drive. Simone wore a simple white dress from David's Bridal, $70 on clearance. Marcus wore the same suit he'd proposed in, cleaned and pressed. Eleanor, Simone's mother, cried through the whole ceremony, kept whispering to her sister, "My baby's going to be a doctor, my baby's going to be somebody." What followed were the grind years. The ones that would later be weaponized in a courtroom as evidence of Marcus's inadequacy as a father. Medical school tuition at Emory ran $92,000 a year. Living expenses, books, supplies, another $35,000 annually. Marcus's salary as a port operations manager covered the mortgage on their rental and basic bills, but it didn't touch the medical school costs. So he picked up a second job. 5 p.m. to midnight, 6 days a week, driving a black Lincoln town car for an executive car service that catered to Atlanta's wealthy. He'd spend the evening ferrying investment bankers from Buckhead high-rises to restaurants in Midtown, listening to them brag about bonuses that exceeded his annual salary, watching them tip their servers more than Marcus made in a week. The money was humiliating but necessary. On good nights, he'd clear $250 in tips. On great nights, $400. He kept every dollar in a separate account labeled medical school. Watched the balance climb with the same focus other men brought to sports scores or stock portfolios. Zara arrived in January 2016, 3 weeks early during Marcus's overnight shift. He'd been driving a Delta executive to Hartsfield-Jackson when Simone called, voice tight with pain. "Water broke. Contractions 5 minutes apart. Mom's driving me to Grady." He'd begged the passenger to let him drop him at the nearest MARTA station, offered to refund the full fare, but the man had just shrugged and checked his phone. "Company's paying. Finish the route." By the time Marcus reached the hospital, Zara had already arrived, 6 pounds, 2 ounces, with Simone's nose and Marcus's wide-set eyes. Eleanor sat in the visitor's chair holding her granddaughter, and the look she gave Marcus when he walked in carried a message he'd learned to read fluently over the coming years. "You weren't here when it mattered." Simone, exhausted and radiant in the hospital bed, reached for his hand. "It's okay, baby. You're building for us. I understand." He wanted to believe her, chose to believe her because the alternative was unbearable. They bought the house in Druid Hills in 2017. A 4-bedroom craftsman with good bones and 100 small problems, $485,000 with a mortgage that made Marcus's stomach clench every time he thought about it. But Simone had been adamant. "The neighborhood matters, the schools matter, our kids deserve stability." Marcus painted every room himself, working weekends in the scattered free hours between jobs. He planted a magnolia tree in the backyard when Isaiah was born in 2018. Imagining his son climbing those branches someday, building forts in the shade. Isaiah's birth Marcus made it to, but only because Simone scheduled the C-section for a Saturday morning. He stood beside her in the operating room, held her hand while the doctors worked, and when they pulled his son into the fluorescent light. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a bone-deep knowledge that he would do anything, sacrifice anything, become anything necessary to protect these two son lives. Eleanor moved to Atlanta that same year, rented a townhouse 15 minutes away, and the dynamic shifted in ways Marcus didn't fully recognize at first. She'd come by the house 3-4 times a week, always during the hours Marcus was at work. She'd watch the kids while Simone studied, cook dinner, fold laundry, and pepper the air with observations that sounded like concern but landed like criticism. "Simone, baby, you're doing so much. Managing the house, the children, your studies, it's extraordinary." "Marcus helps when he can, Mom." Of course. Manual labor is honest work. But you're operating on a different level now, surrounded by doctors and surgeons, people who speak the language of medicine and research. That's your world now. You've earned that." Marcus would come home at 12:30 in the morning, muscles aching from loading shipping containers, ears still ringing from traffic noise and demanding passengers. He'd find notes on the kitchen counter in Simone's handwriting. "Isaiah has ear infection, gave him amoxicillin at 6. Zara needs permission slip signed for field trip. Mom brought dinner, leftovers in fridge." He'd climb the stairs, check on the kids sleeping in their rooms, kiss their foreheads, and feel the guilt settle like concrete in his stomach. They were growing up in the gaps between his shifts, milestones happening in the hours he spent building someone else's future. By 2019, Simone was in her clinical rotations, spending 80-hour weeks at the hospital. The house developed a strange geography. Eleanor's presence everywhere, Marcus's existence reduced to notes and weekend appearances. When he tried to talk to Simone about it, tried to express the gnawing fear that he was becoming peripheral in his own family, she'd look up from her textbooks with eyes that carried the weight of too many obligations and not enough hours. "Not now, Marcus. Boards are in 6 weeks. Can we please just table this until after boards?" The boards came and went. Then it was, "Not now, Marcus. I'm applying for surgical residencies. The next 3 months are critical." Then, "Not now, Marcus. I'm starting at Northside. I need to prove myself. The first year is everything." He learned to swallow the words, to bury the growing distance under the rationalization that this was temporary. That once Simone finished her training, once the financial pressure eased, they'd find their way back to each other. He was building a foundation. Foundations weren't glamorous, but they were necessary. The first real crack appeared in October 2019 at a medical school fundraising gala Simone had insisted they attend. Marcus rented a tuxedo, $180 for the weekend, and showed up at the Ritz-Carlton ballroom feeling like an imposter in borrowed clothes. Simone wore a green dress Eleanor had bought her, something with a designer label Marcus didn't recognize, and she looked radiant and completely at ease in a way that made his chest tighten. The room was full of doctors and their spouses, people who spoke in acronyms Marcus didn't understand, who referenced ski trips to Aspen and summer homes in Hilton Head, like they were discussing the weather. Simone introduced him to her classmates with a brightness that felt performative. "This is my husband, Marcus. He's in logistics management. Not, he's a port operations manager who also drives for a car service to pay my tuition." Just logistics management, vague enough to sound respectable, specific enough to end questions. One of her classmates, a guy named Preston with a family trust fund and a residency at Johns Hopkins, looked Marcus up and down with barely concealed amusement. "Logistics, interesting. My father's in commercial shipping. Which firm are you with?" "Independent contractor, Port of Savannah primarily." Preston's smile sharpened. "Ah, dock work. That's real hands-on stuff. Simone, you're making the rest of us look bad. You're brilliant and philanthropic." The table went quiet for half a second, long enough for Marcus to understand the insult, short enough that no one had to acknowledge it. Simone laughed, a sound that carried too much effort, and changed the subject. They didn't talk about it on the drive home. Marcus gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road, and Simone stared out the passenger window, and the silence between them felt like a living thing growing teeth. The pattern accelerated after that. Medical school mixers where Marcus stood alone by the bar while Simone networked. Department dinners where Eleanor would pull him aside. "You look exhausted, Marcus. Maybe you should sit these out. Let Simone shine without worrying about you." The erosion happened in increments too small to name, too large to ignore. Simone stopped asking about his day, stopped touching his hand when they passed in the hallway, stopped looking at him the way she had that first night in the hospital cafeteria, like he was someone worth knowing. By 2020, the world had collapsed into the surreal nightmare of COVID-19. Marcus was classified as an essential worker, spent the pandemic months moving freight while the city locked down around him. Simone studied for her medical boards at home, Eleanor watching the kids in the basement playroom, and Marcus would come back from 14-hour shifts to find takeout containers in the sink and his family asleep behind closed doors. He passed Zara's room one night in June, found her awake, reading by flashlight under the covers. She looked up when he opened the door, face uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble. "Hey, baby girl, what are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep. I miss you, Daddy." The words hit him like a fist to the sternum. He sat on the edge of her bed, stroked her hair, felt the years of sacrifice crystallize into something that looked uncomfortably like failure. "I miss you too, sweetheart, but this is just for a little while longer. Once Mommy finishes medical school, things will be different, I promise." Zara looked at him with eyes too old for a 4-year-old. "Nana says you work too much, says Mommy's gonna be a doctor and doctors are important. Your mommy is important, and you know what? So are you, so is Isaiah, so am I. We're all important, just in different ways." But even as he said it, Marcus wondered if he believed it anymore. June 2020, late evening. Simone studying in the home office for boards scheduled in 3 weeks. Marcus came home from a double shift, every muscle in his body screaming, and found her hunched over her laptop, eyes bloodshot, stress radiating off her in waves. He made chamomile tea the way she liked it, brought it to her desk, started massaging her shoulders. She leaned back into his touch, exhaled some of the tension and reached up to hold his hand. His scarred, calloused dock worker hand. 5 more months until graduation, baby. Then I'm Dr. Ashford Reid. You'll never have to work this hard again. I promise we'll travel, we'll rest. You've earned it. Marcus pressed his forehead to the top of her head, breathed in the smell of her shampoo and chose to believe, chose hope over the growing dread in his gut. The final total, calculated later by accountants with no emotional investment in the answer. $312,000 in direct contributions from Marcus's labor between 2015 and April 2021. Tuition, mortgage, groceries, car payments, insurance, the endless small emergencies of family life. Every dollar earned in the pre-dawn darkness of the port or the late-night humiliation of driving entitled executives who treated him like sophisticated furniture. But numbers don't capture the full cost. The birthdays missed. The school plays attended by Eleanor and Simone while Marcus unloaded containers in Savannah. The slow dissolve of intimacy into logistics, marriage into roommate arrangement, partnership into resentment dressed up as gratitude. By early 2021, the cracks had become canyons. Simone spoke to him in the clipped, efficient tone she used with nurses. Eleanor's visits increased to 5 days a week, her commentary about Marcus's limitations growing less subtle. And into that deteriorating landscape walked Dr. Dominic Castellano, attending physician at Northside Hospital, newly divorced, blessed with the kind of casual wealth that comes from generational privilege rather than earned struggle. Simone met him during her surgical rotation in January 2021. He was 44, salt and pepper hair, Brioni suits, a lake house on Lanier where he hosted department gatherings. He started mentoring Simone, offering career advice over coffee, introducing her to hospital administrators who could fast-track her residency placement. Marcus first heard the name in February when Simone mentioned in passing that Dr. Castellano had invited her to a conference in Charleston. "It's a huge opportunity, baby. Sports medicine innovation panel, and he thinks I'd be perfect for the orthopedic track at Northside after graduation." "Charleston, that's a weekend trip?" "Friday to Sunday. Eleanor's already said she'll watch the kids. This could set up my entire career, Marcus. You understand, right?" What he understood, his wife was pulling away, and he had no language to stop it. No competing offer to make. What could he promise? More overtime? More missed bedtimes, more calluses and exhaustion in service to a dream that increasingly felt like it belonged to someone else. The Charleston trip became a pattern. Conferences, networking dinners, department retreats. Simone would come home glowing, energized in a way Marcus hadn't seen in years. Talking about surgical techniques and career trajectories with an enthusiasm that had long since vanished from their conversations about family life. He tried to be supportive, tried to quiet the voice that whispered Dominic's name had started appearing too frequently in Simone's sentences, that the smile she wore when she talked about him belonged to a woman falling in love. March 2021. Marcus came home early from a shift that had ended when mechanical failure shut down the port. He walked into the house at 2 in the afternoon expecting it to be empty. Simone at the hospital, kids at daycare, Eleanor doing whatever Eleanor did with her afternoons. Instead, he heard laughter from the kitchen, Simone's voice bright and unguarded in a way it never sounded around him anymore. He walked toward the sound, found her sitting at the kitchen island on a video call and on the laptop screen. Dominic Castellano. Expensive backdrop, clearly his home office, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. Simone's face shifted when she saw Marcus, something guilty flickering across her expression before she smoothed it away. "Marcus, you're home early. Port's down for maintenance. Who's that?" "Dr. Castellano. We're discussing my residency application." "Dominic, this is my husband, Marcus." Dominic smiled. the kind of smile that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Marcus, good to meet you. Simone speaks very highly of you. Logistics, right? That's critical infrastructure work. Underappreciated, frankly." The words were complimentary. The tone said, "I'm speaking to a child." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a trap door opening onto a drop he'd been pretending wasn't there. "Appreciate that. Simone, can we talk for a minute?" "I'm in the middle of something. Can it wait?" "It's about the kids. Won't take long." She sighed, the put-upon sound of someone whose important work was being interrupted by trivialities, and excused herself from the call. Followed Marcus into the hallway, arms crossed, defensive before he'd said a word. "What is it?" "Are you having an affair with him?" The question hung between them, too large for the narrow hallway, too honest for the careful dance they'd been performing around each other for months. Simone's eyes went cold. "That's insulting, Marcus. He's my mentor. He's helping me build my career. Not everything is about you feeling insecure." "I'm not insecure. I'm watching my wife disappear into someone else's life, and I'm trying to understand if I still have a marriage, or if I'm just the guy who pays the bills while you audition for an upgrade." The slap was metaphorical, delivered through Simone's silence and the way she looked at him, like he'd confirmed her worst suspicions about who he was underneath the sacrifice and the patience. "I'm going back to my call. We'll discuss this later." Later never came. They lived in the house like distant relatives for the next month, communicating through Eleanor and written notes, passing each other in doorways without touching. Marcus felt the end approaching like weather, inevitable and destructive, and told himself he'd fight for them when the storm hit. He didn't know the storm had been scheduled. April 18th, 2021, graduation day. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom held 400 guests, a symphony of achievement and privilege. Hospital board members, department heads, attending physicians, families who'd funded research wings and endowed chairs. Crystal chandeliers, open bar, waiters circulating with hors d'oeuvres that cost more than Marcus's weekly grocery budget. Marcus arrived straight from a 13-hour shift that had started at 4:30 a.m. He'd showered at the port, changed in the truck bathroom into his only suit, a $195 polyester blend from JCPenney he'd bought 7 years ago for job interviews. The jacket pulled tight across his shoulders, consequences of a decade spent moving freight. He'd polished his steel-toe work boots until they gleamed, but they were still unmistakably work boots, heavy and graceless under the suit pants. Simone had left the house at noon to prepare, hair and makeup appointment Eleanor had paid for. When Marcus saw her in the ballroom, she was transformed. Emerald Vera Wang gown that had cost $4,200 on his Discover card. Diamond earrings he'd saved 8 months to buy for their anniversary, professionally styled updo. She looked like she belonged in this room, among these people, in a way that made Marcus feel like a piece of scaffolding someone forgot to remove after construction finished. He navigated the crowd looking for her, aware of the stares, the subtle double takes from guests trying to reconcile his appearance with the elegance around them. Found Simone near the bar, surrounded by her medical school cohort, laughing at something someone said. She saw him approaching, and something crossed her face, not quite embarrassment, but close enough that Marcus felt it like a blade between his ribs. "Marcus, you made it." Not, "I'm so glad you're here." Not, "I couldn't have done this without you." Just, "You made it," stated like a minor surprise. He kissed her cheek, felt her stiffen almost imperceptibly. "Wouldn't miss it for anything. You look beautiful." "Thank you. Let me introduce you to everyone. This is my husband, Marcus. He's in logistics management." The phrase again, the careful euphemism that erased the docks and the car service and the physical reality of how this moment had been funded. Marcus shook hands, made small talk, endured the patronizing kindness of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. Across the room, near the silent auction tables, Eleanor stood with a cluster of well-dressed women. Marcus caught fragments of her voice carrying over the ambient noise. Simone's been extraordinary, really, shouldering the intellectual burden while Marcus provided what he could. Manual labor has its place, important work, but now she's joining Castellano Sports Medicine, finally around her equals. People who speak her language. One of the women nodded, sipped champagne, glanced toward Marcus with the kind of pity usually reserved for stray dogs. The message was clear. We see you. We understand what you are. You don't belong here. Marcus excused himself from Simone's circle, walked toward the balcony for air. The Atlanta humidity hit him like a wet towel, but it felt better than the suffocating pretension of the ballroom. He stood at the railing, looked out at the city lights, and tried to remember why he was doing this. Tried to summon the young man from that hospital cafeteria who'd believed partnership and sacrifice could build something worth having. Marcus Reid? He turned. A courier in a plain Navy uniform stood in the balcony doorway holding a manila envelope. That's me. I was told I could find you here, need you to sign. Marcus signed the electronic pad, mind elsewhere, assuming it was some administrative thing, maybe paperwork for the house refinance Simone had mentioned wanting to do. The courier handed over the envelope and disappeared back into the ballroom. Marcus opened it under the amber balcony lights. Superior Court of Fulton County. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words swam for a moment before locking into focus. He flipped through pages, saw his life being dismantled in legal language. Irreconcilable differences. Petitioner seeks sole physical custody. Respondent to be granted supervised visitation every other weekend. Petitioner requests exclusive use of marital residence. Respondent to vacate premises within 45 days of court order. His hands shook. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He checked the filing date, April 12th, 2021. 6 days ago. 6 days after Marcus had made the final $7,800 tuition payment that cleared Simone's account balance to zero. She'd waited, made sure the money cleared before filing, made sure she had the diploma in hand before pulling the trigger. Marcus walked back into the ballroom, envelope clutched in his hand, and found Simone at the podium now. Microphone in front of her, the crowd quieting for her speech. She looked radiant under the spotlight, looked like a woman who'd finally arrived at her destination after a long and difficult journey. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone. This journey has taught me about evolution, about recognizing when relationships have served their purpose, and having the courage to grow beyond them. To truly heal others, you must first ensure your environment reflects the excellence you seek. She paused, looked directly at Marcus standing at the back of the room. Her eyes carried no love, no regret, just the cold clinical assessment of a surgeon examining diseased tissue. Tonight isn't just an ending, it's a liberation. I'm stepping into my authentic self with absolute clarity. I'm surrounding myself with people who challenge me to be better, who operate at the level I've worked so hard to achieve, and I'm doing it with total clarity about who I am and what I deserve. The applause was thunderous. Marcus stood there, a man in a cheap suit and work boots holding the documents that erased his status as a husband, and watched 400 people celebrate his wife's courage in discarding him. He waited until the crowd began to disperse, then walked through the bodies until he reached the stage edge. Simone descended, Eleanor flanking her right side, and to her left, Dr. Dominic Castellano, 44, expensive suit, salt and pepper hair, the satisfied smile of a man who'd won something he'd been competing for. Marcus held up the envelope. The timing's immaculate, Simone. Waited until the diploma was official. Waited until my final payment cleared last Tuesday. Even had your lawyer paid for with my overtime, didn't you? Simone didn't flinch, just sipped her champagne with the steady hand of someone who'd anticipated this moment. This isn't appropriate, Marcus. You're embarrassing yourself in front of my colleagues. I spent 7 years being embarrassed. Embarrassed I couldn't buy you Louboutins instead of Target flats. Embarrassed I showed up here smelling like diesel instead of Tom Ford. I worked 2,492 days straight, 16-hour splits, painted the house you're about to take, planted the tree in the yard where our kids play, built the platform you're standing on, paid for that dress, those earrings, this venue. Around them, people were starting to stare, conversations dying as the confrontation became the new center of attention. Simone's voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and cruel. "And I'm grateful, truly, but you've reached your ceiling, Marcus. I'm ascending. The children need a father who models excellence, not exhaustion. They need exposure to a world where success is measured in innovation and intellect, not sweat and hourly wages." Dominic operates in spaces where million-dollar decisions happen. He can provide Zara and Isaiah access to opportunities you'll never understand. Marcus looked at Dominic, saw the man's carefully neutral expression, the way he stood just close enough to Simone to signal possession. "So that's it? You already have the replacement lined up?" Simone's composure cracked slightly, annoyance bleeding through. "Dominic is a colleague, a mentor, someone who understands the demands of my profession and can provide the kind of partnership I need as I build my career. The petition outlines fair terms. You'll see the children every other weekend. It's more than generous given your schedule makes you essentially an absentee father anyway." The words hit like physical blows. Absentee. The schedule she'd benefited from. The hours he'd worked to fund her dreams, now weaponized as evidence of his inadequacy. Marcus stepped closer, voice low enough that only Simone and Dominic could hear. "You built nothing, Simone. You stood on something someone else built and convinced yourself that made you the architect. You confused my labor with the natural order of things, mistook my sacrifice for your entitlement. I know how to survive on $50 and a broken truck. You've never been broke a day in your life because I wouldn't allow it." He turned to Dominic. "And you? You walked into a finished house, hung your diploma on walls someone else painted, and told yourself you'd earned the view. But here's what neither of you understand. I know how foundations work. I know how debt works. I know exactly what holds buildings up and what brings them down." Dominic's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features. Marcus looked back at Simone. "In 5 years, when your world collapses under debt you don't understand, when the pretty facade starts showing cracks, you'll look for someone to save you. I won't be there. I'll be the one holding the debt. I'll be the one who owns the ground you're standing on. And you'll finally understand the difference between building something and just standing on top of it." He turned and walked out of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, walked past the valets and the luxury cars, climbed into his 1998 Tacoma with the check engine light that never turned off, and drove. Didn't know where he was going, just pointed the truck north and drove until the city lights faded into darkness and the highway stretched empty ahead of him. Somewhere near the Georgia-Tennessee border, at a rest stop at 3:20 in the morning, Marcus pulled into a parking space and sat there in the silence. His phone showed 17 missed calls from Eleanor, 3 from Simone, none that mattered. He pulled out his laptop, the Dell he'd bought for Simone's first year of medical school, and created a new spreadsheet. Title: Liability Audit, Ashford Castellano. He began listing everything he'd seen, everything he'd overheard, every financial detail he could remember. The Charleston conference Simone had attended on the hospital's dime, the partnership discussions with Castellano, the casual mentions of startup costs for the new sports medicine practice they were planning. His phone buzzed. Text from Porter Holloway, an old supervisor from the Savannah docks who'd moved to Memphis 5 years ago to get into commercial real estate. They'd kept in touch sporadically, the way men do when they respect each other's grind. "Heard about your divorce through the grapevine. Sorry, brother. Got something for you if you want a fresh start. Memphis Medical District rezoning old auto plants for biotech offices. Need someone who understands debt collection logistics to buy distressed notes. Room above my office and 15% commission on collections. Won't make you rich quick, but it's a foundation. You interested?" Marcus stared at the message, felt something click into place. Debt collection. Distressed notes. the language of leverage and consequence. He typed back, "When can I start?" Porter's response came immediately. "Yesterday. Drive safe." Marcus pulled back onto I-40 West, the highway unspooling toward Tennessee and a future he couldn't yet imagine but knew would require learning an entirely new language, the vocabulary of creditors and liens, foreclosures and subordination agreements, the grammar of power that came from owning what others owed. Behind him, in Atlanta, Simone would wake up in the house Marcus had painted, would drink coffee from the machine he'd bought, would navigate through the divorce proceedings with the confidence of someone who'd planned every detail. She'd secured her future, eliminated the embarrassment of a working-class husband, positioned herself to build the surgical empire she'd always envisioned. What she didn't know, she'd left Marcus with something more valuable than equity or custody or dignity. She'd left him with knowledge, intimate, detailed knowledge of exactly how she functioned, how she spent, how she thought about money and status and worth. She'd spent 7 years teaching him the architecture of her ambitions while assuming he was too simple to understand the blueprint. That was her first mistake. The second would be assuming his sentence meant surrender. Marcus drove through the pre-dawn darkness, hands steady on the wheel, and for the first time in years, felt the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything left to build. The foundation years were over. The construction phase was about to begin, and this time, Marcus thought, gripping the wheel as Memphis City lights appeared on the horizon, this time I'm building something they can't stand on top of. This time I'm building something that only answers to me. Marcus arrived in Memphis at 11:15 in the morning, the city sprawling under a white-hot mesa that turned the Mississippi River into molten silver. Porter Holloway's office occupied a converted warehouse on South Main Street, the kind of building that had seen better decades. Brick facade tagged with faded graffiti, windows reinforced with steel mesh, a hand-painted sign reading Holloway Property Solutions hanging crooked above the entrance. Inside smelled like old paper, stale coffee, and the particular mustiness of financial documents that had absorbed decades of humidity. Porter sat behind a desk buried under file folders. A black man in his early 60s with a gray beard, reading glasses perched on his nose, and the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating systems designed to exclude him. He looked up when Marcus walked in, took in the wrinkled clothes and hollow eyes of a man who'd driven 7 hours on pure adrenaline. "You look like hell, son." Marcus set his single duffel bag on the floor. "I've been through hell. Now I want to learn how to own it. Teach me debt collection. Teach me how money actually works when you don't have any." Porter leaned back, chair creaking. "First lesson, debt is leverage. The man who owns what you owe controls what you do. But before we get philosophical, you need sleep. Studio apartments up those stairs, second door on the left, bathroom down the hall. Take a shower, get 8 hours, then we'll talk about whether you got the stomach for this business." The studio was 520 square feet of exposed brick and water-stained ceiling, furnished with a futon mattress on the floor, a card table, 2 folding chairs, and a mini-fridge that hummed like a dying engine. A single window looked out over the street, bars on the outside, view of a pawn shop and a check-cashing place that promised loans at rates that would make loan sharks blush. Marcus dropped his bag, sat on the futon, and felt the full weight of the last 18 hours crash down. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. Simone demanding they talk, Eleanor calling him selfish and irresponsible. A voicemail from the family court saying he'd been served and needed to appear for a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. He turned the phone off, lay back on the thin mattress, and fell asleep still wearing his suit. Porter woke him 16 hours later, knocking loud enough to rattle the door frame. Marcus surfaced from dreams of courtrooms and empty houses, found the sun setting orange and purple beyond his barred window. "You missed a whole day. That's fine. You needed it. But now we work. Get cleaned up and meet me downstairs in 20 minutes. Bring that laptop you were carrying." Marcus showered in a bathroom with cracked tile and water pressure that fluctuated between trickle and fire hose. dressed in jeans and a clean t-shirt from his bag. Looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Eyes harder than they'd been 2 days ago, jaw set in a way that suggested the capacity for patience had been replaced by something colder and more calculated. Downstairs, Porter had cleared space on the desk, spread out 3 file folders, each marked with a different business name and dollar amount. You said you want to learn debt collection, so let's start with the basics. These are 3 accounts I'm working. Small potatoes, 5 to 15,000 each. All medical debt from practices that closed or sold. The debtors are individuals who got caught in the gap between insurance coverage and actual medical costs. Most of them are 1 bad month away from bankruptcy. Your job is to read these files and tell me what you see. Marcus opened the first folder. Female, 34, single mother, worked as a dental hygienist until the practice closed. Owed $8,700 for an emergency appendectomy her insurance had denied coverage on because the hospital was out of network. Current address, apartment in Fraser, rent 3 months behind, according to public records Porter had annotated. Second folder, male, 52, construction worker, spine surgery after a fall that workers' comp had fought to deny. Owed $14,200. Recently divorced, living with his brother. Third folder, female, 61, retired teacher, cancer treatment that Medicare hadn't fully covered. Owed $6,300. Owned her house outright but had already taken out a reverse mortgage. Marcus read through all 3, then looked up at Porter. These people are broke. Even if you sued them and got judgments, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. Porter nodded slowly. That's what most collectors think. They call these people, harass them, threaten them, maybe get $100 a month in payments that barely cover interest. But that's because most collectors don't understand the real game. You don't collect from the debtor, you collect from the asset. The question isn't, can this person pay? It's, what does this person have that can be converted to payment? He pointed at the first folder. Dental hygienist. Can't pay, but she's got skills. I called the practice that bought out her old employer, told them I had a trained hygienist looking for work, asked if they'd hire her if I cleared her debt and took a percentage of her first year's wages as repayment. They said yes, she starts next month. I get 20% of her salary for 12 months. She gets employed and debt-free. Everybody wins except the original creditor who sold me this debt for 40 cents on the dollar. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. You're not collecting debt. You're solving problems and taking a fee. Now you're learning. Second guy, construction worker, can't work because of the spine surgery, but he's got a truck he owns outright. 2015 F150 in decent shape. I'm working a deal where we transfer the title to settle the debt. I sell the truck for 10 grand, pay off his 14,000 at a discount to the original creditor, pocket the difference. He gets debt-free. I make money. Original creditor recoups more than they would through traditional collection. And the retired teacher? Porter's expression darkened. That one's trickier. She got taken advantage of by the reverse mortgage company. And the cancer treatment debt is legitimate. But she's got no income stream and no assets beyond the house equity that's already encumbered. Some debts you can't collect ethically. That's a lesson too. Knowing when to walk away. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus lived in that studio apartment and absorbed information like a man possessed. Porter introduced him to the ecosystem of debt collection, how medical practices sold their unpaid receivables to collection agencies for pennies on the dollar, how those agencies bundled and resold the debt in secondary markets, how someone with capital and knowledge could buy those notes and either collect directly or restructure them into new arrangements that generated profit. But Marcus didn't have capital. He had $23,400 in savings, the remainder after attorney fees and the first month of child support that had automatically deducted from his account. So Porter taught him how to work without money, how to broker deals between debtors and creditors, taking a percentage of successful collections without putting up cash himself. how to find public records that revealed asset transfers and property ownership, how to read financial statements and identify businesses that were over-leveraged and vulnerable. Marcus spent his days in the Memphis Public Library, systematically working through books on commercial law, bankruptcy code, secured transactions, and real estate finance. The librarian started recognizing him, the intense black man who showed up when the doors opened at 9 and stayed until closing at 8, surrounded by legal textbooks he'd checked out on an interlibrary loan. Nights he'd return to the studio and study Tennessee and Georgia debt collection statutes until his eyes burned. He learned about subordination agreements, quiet title actions, fraudulent conveyance claims. He learned the difference between secured and unsecured debt, between judgment liens and consensual liens, between personal liability and corporate veil piercing. Porter would appear in the doorway sometimes, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and find Marcus still awake, laptop glowing, surrounded by notes. "You can't learn this in a month, son. This is years of education you're trying to cram into weeks." Marcus didn't look up from the screen. "I don't have years. I have a custody hearing in 14 days where my ex-wife's lawyer is going to argue I'm an unfit father because I work too much and live in a different state. I need to understand how the game works so I can build something that looks stale enough to convince a judge I'm not a deadbeat. And then I need to understand it well enough to dismantle everything she's building in Atlanta, because that's the only thing that's going to keep me sane." Porter studied him for a long moment. "What she did to you, that's fuel, but fuel burns. You got to be careful it doesn't burn you up from the inside." "I'm not interested in careful. I'm interested in effective." The custody hearing arrived like scheduled violence. Marcus drove back to Atlanta on a Tuesday morning, wearing the same JCPenney suit, facing Judge Patricia Moreland in a family court that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken families. Simone's lawyer was Pierce Worthington from Alston and Bird, $600 an hour, silver hair, and a suit that cost more than Marcus's truck. He presented Marcus's case like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments for conviction. "Your Honor, the facts speak for themselves. Mr. Reid has been physically present for 9% of his children's morning routines over the past 36 months. He works an average of 74 hours weekly across 2 separate employment locations. He has recently relocated to Tennessee, over 300 miles from the marital residence. Dr. Ashford, by contrast, is a board-certified physician with a structured schedule and on-site childcare available at her workplace. She has stable housing, family support from her mother, and an annual income of $380,000 that provides financial security for the children." Marcus's lawyer was Leonard Briggs, a solo practitioner who'd agreed to handle the case for $1,800 flat fee because he'd heard Marcus's story and recognized the injustice. Even if the law didn't care. Briggs was 70, wore a suit shiny with age, and spoke with the slow deliberation of someone who'd lost more cases than he'd won but kept fighting anyway. "Your Honor, Mr. Reid worked those hours specifically to fund Dr. Ashford's medical education. He sacrificed his time with his children so his wife could pursue her career. To now penalize him for that sacrifice is fundamentally unjust." Judge Moreland looked at Marcus over her reading glasses, expression neutral in the way of people who'd made too many Solomon's choices and stopped feeling the weight. "Mr. Briggs, I appreciate the inequity you're highlighting, but the court must look at current circumstances and future stability. Mr. Reid, can you commit to being home by 5:30 p.m. every evening to supervise homework, dinner, and bedtime routines?" Marcus gripped the table edge, felt the wood grain bite into his palms. "Your Honor, if I do that, I can't maintain the mortgage payments on the house where my children currently live. I can't pay the child support Dr. Ashford is requesting. I'm working to maintain the life they're accustomed to." "And therein lies the problem, Mr. Reid. You're 300 miles away, working unstable hours, living in temporary housing. Dr. Ashford has demonstrated she can provide stability. The court's primary concern is the best interest of the children." Worthington slid a document across to the judge. Your Honor, Dr. Ashford has prepared a detailed accounting of Mr. Reid's absences over the past 3 years. 847 missed dinners, 312 missed bedtimes, 53 missed school events including parent-teacher conferences, recitals, and sporting events. This is not a father who has been meaningfully present in his children's lives. The spreadsheet was color-coded, professional, devastating, and it told Marcus everything he needed to know about how long Simone had been planning this. 18 months minimum of documentation, every absence cataloged and weaponized. Judge Moreland reviewed the document, then delivered her ruling in the flat voice of bureaucratic inevitability. Simone, sole physical custody, Marcus alternating weekends Saturday 8 a.m. through Sunday 7 p.m., child support $1,650 monthly. Marcus's equity in the marital residence, $27,500 against an appraised value of $615,000. 45 days to vacate the premises and remove personal belongings. The gavel fell. Marcus's life reduced to every other weekend visitation and a check he'd send monthly to the woman who'd erased him. Simone stood in the hallway outside the courtroom afterward, Worthington beside her, victory written in the set of her shoulders. She approached Marcus with an expression that might have been intended as conciliatory but landed as condescending. I'll arrange for your belongings to be professionally packed. The children are already adapting well to the new arrangement. Dominic has been wonderful with them. Please don't disrupt their adjustment with unnecessary drama. Marcus looked at her, this woman he'd loved enough to sacrifice 7 years for, and felt nothing. The grief had burned out somewhere between Memphis and Atlanta, replaced by a cold clarity that felt like freedom. I won't cause drama, Simone. I'll just be gone. He drove back to Memphis that night, the city lights of Atlanta shrinking in his rearview mirror, and understood that the person he'd been, the man who believed hard work and sacrifice would be rewarded, who trusted that marriage meant partnership, had died in that courtroom. What remained was someone capable of longer games and colder calculations. Porter was waiting in the office when Marcus returned at 2 a.m., coffee already brewed. How bad? About as bad as it gets, every other weekend. Minimal equity. She documented everything, had it planned for over a year. Porter poured 2 cups, slid one across. So what now? Marcus pulled out his laptop, opened the file he'd been building. Now I stop playing defense. You said debt is leverage. You said the man who owns what someone owes controls what they do. Simone and her new partner are opening a sports medicine practice. That takes capital, equipment financing, real estate leases. They're going to borrow money, and whoever holds those notes is going to have power over them. You want to become their creditor. Eventually. But first I need to learn this business well enough to build capital. And I need to do it invisible where they can't see me coming. Porter leaned back, something like approval crossing his weathered features. Then let's start with your first solo case. Woman named Teresa Washington owes $4,200 on a closed orthodontics account, lives in Orange Mound, works part-time at a grocery store. Files on your desk. Figure out how to collect it ethically, and you keep 15% of whatever you bring in. Marcus spent 3 days studying Teresa Washington's file, cross-referencing property records, employment history, court filings. She was 39, raising 2 teenagers alone after her husband had been incarcerated for drug possession. The orthodontics debt was for her daughter's braces. Treatment interrupted when the practice closed unexpectedly. Traditional collection would involve calling her, demanding payment she couldn't make, maybe getting $50 a month that would take 7 years to clear the debt. Marcus found a different angle. He called the orthodontics practice that had bought out the closed location, spoke to their office manager, explained that he represented a patient who'd paid for treatment that was never completed. Would they honor the original treatment plan if he could facilitate payment? They agreed. He then contacted Teresa, explained he could get her daughter's treatment finished if she'd agree to a structured payment plan, $60 monthly for 3 years, plus $100 up front. She cried on the phone. "You're saying my baby can get her braces finished?" "Yes, ma'am, and the debt gets cleared. You pay a little less than you owe. Your daughter gets the treatment she was promised, and everyone moves forward." The deal closed in a week. Marcus collected his 15% commission, $189, and felt something that might have been satisfaction, except it was too small for the word. But it was proof of concept. Problems could be solved if you understood the system well enough to find the gaps. Over the next 6 months, Marcus worked a dozen similar cases, each one teaching him something new about leverage and negotiation. He kept his overhead minimal, still living in the studio, eating ramen and peanut butter, banking every dollar beyond basic survival. By September 2021, he'd saved another $14,000 on top of what remained from Atlanta. That's when Porter introduced him to the auto plant opportunity. Abandoned Firestone facility on Riverside Boulevard, 240,000 square feet of empty industrial space, sitting unused since 2009. The owner was a 76-year-old widow in Arizona who'd inherited it from her husband and had been bleeding property taxes for over a decade. $47,000 annually for a property generating zero income. Porter had found it through public records, seen the tax liens piling up, and recognized the potential. The facility sat directly adjacent to Regional One Health's campus, and Marcus spent 2 weeks in the Memphis City Planning Department reviewing zoning maps and development proposals. Found that the hospital had submitted preliminary plans for a new orthopedic clinic expansion, with the Firestone property listed as a potential acquisition target. The widow wanted $380,000 for the property, desperate to unload it. Porter offered to co-sign a loan if Marcus could come up with the down payment. Marcus put in his entire savings, $37,000, and took the financial risk that would either launch him or destroy him. 4 months later, Regional One Health offered $1.9 million for the property. After Porter's share and loan payback, Marcus cleared $287,000. More money than he'd ever seen in his life, earned not through labor but through understanding information asymmetry and having the courage to risk everything. He didn't buy a car or celebrate or take a day off. He walked into the office of Diane Reeves, a corporate attorney whose name he'd found through Memphis legal directories. Black woman, 52, managing partner of a boutique firm specializing in complex commercial transactions. Her conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mississippi, furniture that whispered old money, and an energy that suggested she hadn't gotten here by being nice. Marcus laid out exactly what he wanted: a limited liability company with multiple layers of anonymity, structured to buy medical practice debt in Georgia and Tennessee, without his name appearing anywhere public. He wanted to be a ghost creditor, invisible until the moment he chose to reveal himself. Diane listened without interrupting, then leaned back in her chair. "You want to hunt someone who hurt you, and you want to do it legally through debt acquisition and leverage, rather than anything that could get you arrested. I want to own what they owe, and I want them to not know it's me until I decide otherwise. That's going to cost you $45,000 in formation fees, filing costs, and retainer. And I'll need to know the target to make sure we're not structuring something that crosses legal lines." Marcus told her about Simone, about Dominic, about the graduation night divorce papers and the custody hearing spreadsheet. Diane's expression never changed, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory of her own battles. "Your ex-wife and her new partner are opening a sports medicine practice. That means construction loans, equipment financing, real estate leases, malpractice insurance, operational credit lines. Every one of those creates debt instruments that can be bought and sold in secondary markets. You want to systematically acquire controlling interests in their debt structure until you effectively own their business without them knowing." "Exactly." That's not revenge, that's just business, ruthless business, but legal. I can structure that. Welcome to the world of acquisition finance, Mr. Reid. Talbot Holdings, LLC was formed in October 2023, named after Marcus's father, Talbot Reid, who'd worked 40 years in a Detroit auto plant and died of a heart attack 3 days before his retirement party. The structure was Byzantine, multiple subsidiary entities, registered agents in Delaware, operating agreements that buried Marcus's ownership under corporate layers thick enough that even forensic accountants would struggle to trace it. Marcus plowed the remaining $242,000 into capitalizing the entity, then began the education process that would define the next 2 years of his life. Diane introduced him to the secondary debt markets where distressed medical practice loans traded at steep discounts, taught him how to read loan agreements and identify which had recourse provisions that allowed creditors to pursue personal assets of guarantors, showed him how to use public records to build complete financial profiles of targets without ever directly contacting them. The hunt began in November 2023. Marcus identified the lenders who'd financed Castellano Ashford Sports Medicine Center, the construction loan through a regional bank, the equipment through a specialty medical finance company, the operational credit line through a different institution. Then he waited, patient as stone, for any of those notes to show distress. The first opportunity came 8 months later. The medical equipment finance company had bundled a portfolio of loans including Castellano Ashford's and sold them to a private equity firm that specialized in distressed healthcare debt. The bundle included 43 separate loans, totaling $18 million, of which Castellano Ashford represented $340,000. The private equity firm was looking to offload the entire portfolio for 55 cents on the dollar. Marcus, through Talbot Holdings, offered to buy just 5 specific loans, including Castellano Ashford's, paying 60 cents on the dollar for those 5 but leaving the rest. After negotiation, they accepted, desperate to start generating returns. Marcus paid $187,000 for a $340,000 debt that Simone and Dominic owed, becoming their creditor without their knowledge. The loan servicing company that collected payments simply notified them that their note had been sold to Talbot Holdings, LLC, standard language that triggered no alarm. The second acquisition came 3 months later. Castellano Ashford had contracted with a medical billing company to handle their insurance claims and collections. That billing company had extended them $67,000 in credit for services rendered on a net 90 payment term. When Castellano Ashford missed payments twice, the billing company sold the debt to Talbot Holdings for $31,000. Marcus now owned $407,000 of Simone's debt, acquired for $218,000. And she had no idea. Meanwhile, life had developed its own brutal rhythm. Every other weekend, Marcus drove the 7.5 hours from Memphis to Atlanta, picked up Zara and Isaiah outside the Druid Hills house he used to own, and took them to whatever activities he could pack into 35 hours. Museums, parks, movies, restaurants where he let them order anything they wanted because what he couldn't give them in time he tried to compensate for in attention. Isaiah at 8 was quiet, thoughtful, spent their weekends building elaborate structures out of whatever materials Marcus provided. Legos, cardboard, sticks from the park. He asked questions about how things worked, why buildings stood up, what made bridges strong. Zara at 10 was sharper, more observant, catching details Marcus wished she'd miss. She noticed that Marcus never went inside the house during pickup, noticed that Dominic always stood too close to their mother, hand possessive on her lower back. Noticed the tension that vibrated in the air whenever the adults were in proximity. November 2023, pickup Saturday morning. Dominic brought the kids out with his arm around both of them, walking them to Marcus's truck like he was delivering packages. New Porsche Cayenne in the driveway, gleaming black, probably $90,000 worth of leased status. Marcus, good to see you, man. Kids had a blast at Amelia Island last month, took the boat out, did some fishing. Right, guys? Isaiah nodded quietly. Zara looked at her shoes. Marcus helped them into the truck, kept his voice level. Appreciate you keeping them safe. Nice car. Gift to myself. Practice is absolutely exploding. We're opening a second location in Buckhead next year. Maybe when you're in town you could swing by for a tour. Oh wait, probably not appropriate given Simone's comfort levels. The casual cruelty delivered with a smile loud enough for neighbors to hear, designed to establish hierarchy. Marcus let it bounce off, refused to give Dominic the satisfaction of a reaction. 20 minutes down the road, Isaiah's small voice from the back seat. Dad, why doesn't Coach Dom talk to you nice? He talks different when you're not there. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, chose his words carefully. Some people need to make others feel small to feel big themselves, buddy. It's not about me. It's about him needing to prove something to himself. Zara, older and angrier. Mom says you're stuck in a limited mindset. What does that mean? The words coming from his daughter's mouth, Simone's vocabulary transplanted into a child's voice, felt like swallowing broken glass. It means your mom and I see the world differently now, and that's okay. What matters is you two know I love you. Always. No matter what anyone says. But the poison was already working its way through his children's understanding of who their father was. Marcus could see it in small moments. Isaiah's hesitation before hugging him. Zara's questions about why he lived so far away, the way they both talked about Dominic's house and Dominic's boat and Dominic's gifts with a casual ownership that excluded Marcus from their daily lives. He drove them back to Memphis for those weekends, let them sleep in his studio apartment. He took the floor, gave them the futon, and tried to compress meaningful fatherhood into hours that never felt like enough. Homework at the card table, walks along the Mississippi Bluff, conversations about school and friends and dreams that revealed how much of their lives he was missing. Sunday evenings were surgery, delivering them back to Atlanta, watching them walk back into the house where Dominic waited with the easy smile of a man who'd won something he hadn't earned. Marcus would drive back to Memphis alone, 7.5 hours to process the grief and rage, and by the time he pulled into South Main Street, the emotions had crystallized into something harder and more useful. Data, intel, ammunition. He started tracking Simone and Dominic's spending through public records, credit reports that Diane's investigator could access legally. The cash-out refinance on the Druid Hills house in March 2024. $150,000 pulled out, used for a kitchen remodel that cost $85,000 and left $65,000 unaccounted for. Dominic's lake house on Lanier, purchased in 2022 for $680,000 with a second mortgage at 9.5% interest. The Airbnb listing that showed 12 days of rentals generating $8,400 annually, while the carrying costs exceeded $31,000. They were spending like people who'd confused revenue with profit, like people who'd never experienced the terror of a balance sheet turning red. And Marcus watched from Memphis, patient and invisible, and waited for the real opportunity. It came in May 2024, delivered through Diane's network. The construction loan for Castellano Ashford Sports Medicine Center, the $6.8 million note that had financed the building itself, had gone delinquent. 4 missed monthly payments, each one $47,000, and the original lender was desperate to offload it before they had to mark it as a loss on their balance sheet. They were offering it for $4.1 million, 60 cents on the dollar to anyone willing to take on the foreclosure risk. Marcus sat in Diane's conference room, looking at the loan documents, and felt something settle into place. This was it, the fulcrum. The point where observation became action. If I buy this, I control the building their practice operates in. They default, I can foreclose. Take the facility, the equipment, everything. Diane nodded. And according to the personal guarantee they both signed, if the business can't satisfy the debt, You can pursue their personal assets, houses, cars, bank accounts, but Marcus, this is $4.1 million. That's most of your capital. If they somehow manage to cure the default, you're locked into a performing loan that pays modest interest but doesn't give you the leverage you want. They won't cure it. I've been tracking their cash flow. They're bleeding money, covering operational losses by maxing out credit lines. The second location Dominic was bragging about, that's another $42,000 monthly in lease payments they can't afford. They're in a death spiral and they don't even know it yet. You're betting your entire stake on them failing. Marcus looked out at the Mississippi River, the brown water rolling eternal and indifferent. I'm betting on consequences. They made choices. This is just math catching up. Talbot Holdings purchased the construction loan in June 2024. The servicing company notified Castellano Ashford that their note had been sold, standard language, nothing to trigger alarm. Except now, Marcus owned $7.2 million of their debt, the construction loan, the equipment financing, the billing company receivable. He was the invisible landlord of their entire operation, and then, systematically, he began to investigate what else they'd been hiding. Because people who were sloppy with money were usually sloppy with other things too. The malpractice case appeared in public court filings in June 2024. Brandon Garrett versus Castellano Ashford Sports Medicine Center. Civil suit filed in Fulton County Superior Court seeking $8.5 million in damages. Marcus pulled the complaint, read it with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned to extract meaning from legal documents. Brandon Garrett, 23, former Georgia Tech linebacker, NFL draft prospect. Torn ACL during training. Chose Castellano Ashford because they marketed specifically to athletes. Surgery performed by Dr. Dominic Castellano on March 8, 2023, scheduled for 3 hours, actually completed in 2 hours, 15 minutes. Reason for the rush: Dominic's daughter had a high school musical opening night at 7:30 p.m., and he'd promised to be there. Post-operative complications began 3 days later: severe pain, instability, inability to bear weight. Follow-up imaging revealed the knee replacement components had been installed, misaligned by 8 degrees. Revision surgery required, performed March 28th. Revision failed. Permanent nerve damage, 40% knee function. NFL career over. Current employment, Jiffy Lube, $16 an hour. Marcus read through the depositions, the expert witness affidavits, the surgical notes that had been revised after the fact with different timestamps. Simone had been the assisting surgeon. She'd signed post-operative notes stating sight clear, patient stable, when the imaging would later prove otherwise. The insurance company had denied coverage. Found evidence the surgery had been rushed, that adequate peer review hadn't been conducted, that the post-operative notes contained inconsistencies suggesting after-the-fact alteration. Castellano Ashford was on the hook for $8.5 million with no insurance coverage, and Marcus owned their building. He didn't hire a private investigator to dig deeper. Did it himself instead, spending 4 weeks in Atlanta staying at a Motel 6 on Claremont Road, conducting surveillance like a man who'd decided patience was a weapon. Watched the practice, tracked staffing patterns, overheard conversations. One afternoon, he walked into Castellano Ashford as a potential patient, wearing a Falcons cap and jeans, got a tour from the office manager, Kristen. Asked casual questions about the practice, the surgeons, the lawsuit everyone was whispering about. Kristen's face had darkened at the Brandon Garrett mention. That was unfortunate, but Dr. Castellano is an excellent surgeon, very committed to his family, which sometimes means efficient procedures. The phrasing was careful, but the subtext was clear. The staff knew. They'd known Dominic had rushed the surgery, had watched him prioritize a high school play over a patient's professional athletic career. Marcus obtained the surgical footage through legal discovery requests that Diane filed as a secured creditor with interest in the business's viability. Watched it frame by frame in a conference room in Memphis. Timestamp 10:47 a.m. Dominic's hands precise and steady installing the knee components. Timestamp 5:52 p.m. Dominic looking at his watch, visible tension in his shoulders. Timestamp 5:54 p.m. The moment the arthroscope showed the popliteal nerve compression, the subtle misalignment. Timestamp 5:56 p.m. Dominic making the decision to close, glancing at the clock again. Surgical team's body language suggesting uncertainty. Marcus closed the laptop, looked at Diane. They didn't just make a mistake, they made a choice. Dominic chose his daughter's opening night over Brandon's career, and Simone signed off on it rather than challenge her senior partner. This is prosecutable. Medical malpractice, falsified records, insurance fraud. The falsified timestamps alone constitute federal offenses if they affected interstate insurance claims. Can we use this? As a creditor with security interest in the practice, we can present it to the state medical board and federal prosecutors as evidence of fraud affecting the business's ability to satisfy its debts to our client. It's our fiduciary duty, actually, to report fraud that impacts collateral value. Marcus thought about Brandon Garrett working at Jiffy Lube for $16 an hour. Knee destroyed by someone's selfish choice. Thought about Simone signing false documents because she was too afraid or too ambitious to challenge Dominic. Thought about all the years he'd worked himself to exhaustion while they built an empire on arrogance and entitlement. Then let's report it. But not yet. First, I want to give Simone one chance to do the right thing. The phone call came on July 15th, 2024. Marcus was in his office. He'd upgraded from the studio to a proper workspace on the 15th floor of Crescent Center overlooking Memphis. When his phone showed a number he'd deleted from contacts but still recognized by heart, he let it ring 4 times before answering. Let Simone sit in the uncertainty. Simone. Her voice came through strained, attempting casual brightness and failing. Marcus, hi, this is... It's been a while since we talked directly. You use the co-parenting app. What's different? A pause, the sound of her gathering herself. I've been reflecting. On us. On what happened. I think we were both hurt, both made mistakes, and I'm calling because the kids miss you. They ask about you constantly, Zara especially. She's becoming a young woman. She needs her father more present. Marcus kept his voice neutral. I see them every other weekend, per the court order you requested. I know, but what if we revised that? What if we gave you more time? Dominic and I have been discussing it, and we're in a place now where we can be generous, more flexible. You've always been a good father, Marcus. The kids deserve more of you. The trap was obvious, the desperation underneath barely concealed. Marcus pulled up his files on Castellano Ashford's financials, saw the 4 months of delinquent payments on the construction loan, the maxed credit lines, the bleeding cash flow. Why now, Simone? Because I'm secure now. The practice is thriving. Dominic and I are planning marriage. I can afford to be magnanimous. You've always been a good father. The kids deserve more time with you. Why don't you come to Atlanta? We can talk in person, just us. No lawyers, just 2 parents doing what's best. When? Relief flooded her voice. Friday, 6 p.m. We could meet at the house, neutral territory, just talk. I'll be there. The call ended. Marcus sat looking at the Memphis skyline, and Diane walked in with a knowing expression. She's terrified. She got the letters about the debt sales, probably got served with the Brandon Garrett discovery requests. She knows something's wrong, and she's trying to lock you into an agreement before she understands how bad it really is. She wants me to sign away my right to pursue business interests in Georgia in exchange for more custody time. Probably drafted papers already, thinking I'm desperate enough to agree. Are you going to tell her? Marcus pulled up the timeline they'd constructed together. Monday, file foreclosure notice requiring 60 days to cure $7.125 million. Tuesday, deliver via certified mail and sheriff's service. Wednesday, file complaint with Georgia Medical Board. Thursday, file federal fraud complaint. Friday, walk into that house after every bomb has already dropped. No, I'm going to let Friday be very educational for her. The pieces were in motion now, the machinery of consequences grinding forward with the inevitability of compound interest. Marcus spent the week before the Atlanta trip reviewing every document, every filing, every strategy, made sure the evidence was airtight, the legal standing unassailable, the timing precise. Thursday night, alone in his office, he looked at the framed photo on his desk, Zara and Isaiah from last weekend laughing at something stupid he'd done to make them smile, thought about how this would impact them, how the destruction of their mother's world would ripple through their lives. A moment of doubt flickered. Was this too much? Was he becoming the kind of person who burned down houses because someone had hurt him? Then he remembered Simone's face at graduation, cold and clinical. Remembered the custody hearing spreadsheet. 18 months of documented absences. Remembered Dominic's condescending smile and Isaiah's quiet voice asking why Coach Dom didn't talk to Marcus nice. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. This was the bill coming due for choices they'd made, lies they'd told, people they'd hurt. Brandon Garrett deserved justice. Marcus deserved his children. And Simone and Dominic deserved to learn that foundations matter. That the people you discard don't always stay discarded, and that debt, financial, moral, karmic, eventually finds its way home. Marcus closed the photo file, packed his briefcase, and prepared for the drive to Atlanta. Tomorrow Simone would learn what it meant to be owned. And the man she'd divorced for being stuck in a limited mindset would teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. The foreclosure notices hit Castellano Ashford Sports Medicine Center at 4:17 p.m. on Monday, July 18, 2024, delivered by certified mail and simultaneously served by a Fulton County Sheriff's deputy who handed them directly to the office manager. By 4:45, Simone's phone was ringing in Marcus's conference room display. 11 missed calls he watched accumulate without answering, letting each one go to voicemail while Diane and Levon Thatcher reviewed the final documentation. The Georgia Medical Board complaint landed Tuesday morning, filed by an anonymous concerned creditor with attached evidence including surgical footage, revised timestamps on post-operative notes, and a forensic analysis showing the revisions had occurred 4 hours after the initial filing. The board's investigator called Castellano Ashford at 9:30 a.m. requesting immediate production of all records related to Brandon Garrett. Wednesday, federal investigators from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division delivered notice that both Simone Ashford and Dominic Castellano were subjects of an investigation into wire fraud, embezzlement of employee funds, and falsification of medical records affecting interstate insurance claims. The agents were polite, professional, and clear. Retain counsel immediately. Marcus drove to Atlanta Thursday evening, timing his arrival for late night when the city had quieted. He checked into a Marriott in Buckhead, laid out his clothes for tomorrow, and slept with the dreamless efficiency of someone who'd made peace with what he was about to do. Friday morning, he met Diane and Levon at a Waffle House off Piedmont, the three of them occupying a corner booth surrounded by the comforting normalcy of short-order cooking and waitresses who'd seen every variation of human drama play out over scattered hash browns. Levon spread financial documents across the table, tapping key figures with a pen. They received all 3 notices. The foreclosure gives them 60 days to cure $7.125 million. Construction loan principal plus missed payments and penalties. They can't raise that. Every bank in Atlanta has already turned them down for refinancing. Their credit lines are maxed. Their personal accounts have maybe $40,000 liquid between them. The medical board investigation triggers an automatic suspension of privileges pending review. They can't perform surgeries until the investigation concludes, which means no revenue generation from the practice's primary profit center. Timeline on that is minimum 6 months, probably longer. Diane added cream to her coffee with the precise movements of someone who measured everything. The federal investigation is the kill shot. Wire fraud carries 20 years maximum, though realistically they're looking at 3 to 5 each with clean records, but the publicity alone will destroy their referral network. No hospital will credential them. No insurance company will cover them. Even if they avoid prison, their medical careers are effectively over. Marcus cut into his waffle, appetite mechanical rather than genuine. What about Brandon Garrett's civil suit? Trial scheduled for September 9th. With insurance coverage denied and the practice effectively insolvent, he'll get a judgment but no realistic path to collection, unless someone with resources decides to buy that judgment at a discount and pursue it on his behalf. How much would that cost? Brandon's family would probably sell the judgment for 20 cents on the dollar. That's $1.7 million to acquire an $8.5 million claim against Simone and Dominic personally. You'd own their financial destruction completely. Marcus thought about the 23-year-old working at Jiffy Lube, knee ruined by someone's selfish impatience. Make the offer, but structure it so Brandon's family gets the full $8.5 million eventually. I'll pay them in installments over 5 years from whatever we collect. They shouldn't be punished because Simone and Dominic are broke. Diane made a note. That's going to cost you potentially the full $8.5 million if you actually follow through. Then it costs me. He didn't ask to be collateral damage in someone else's arrogance. The meeting broke at 11 a.m. Marcus drove to Druid Hills alone, the neighborhood achingly familiar, the same streets where he'd pushed Zara's stroller, where he'd taught Isaiah to ride a bike on weekend mornings before his overnight driving shifts. The magnolia tree he'd planted was gone, replaced by an elaborate koi pond that probably cost $40,000 and required maintenance. Simone would soon be unable to afford. He parked on the street rather than the driveway, a small psychological choice that kept him outside the property boundary. Sat in the rental car for 10 minutes, breathing deliberately, centering himself for what came next, 6:15 p.m., 15 minutes late. Intentionally, Marcus walked to the front door. It opened before he could knock, Simone standing there looking like she'd aged 5 years in the 3 days since the notices arrived. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing yoga pants and a t-shirt, the carefully constructed surgeon persona stripped away to reveal someone running on fear and diminishing options. Marcus, thank God. Come in, please. The house interior had been remodeled since he'd left. Everything cold and modern, glass and steel and expensive minimalism that erased any trace of the warm family home it had been. Dominic sat on a white leather sofa in the living room, looking worse than Simone, face haggard and eyes carrying the particular panic of someone watching their world collapse in real time. 3 manila envelopes sat on the coffee table between them like accusations. Marcus remained standing, refusing the implicit invitation to sit and make this comfortable. Simone said you wanted to discuss custody. Her composure cracked immediately, desperation flooding through. Marcus, please, we received notices, 3 separate notices, foreclosure on the practice, medical board investigation, federal criminal investigation. This has to be you. This is revenge. I don't know what you're referring to. Dominic lurched to his feet, aggression masking terror. Don't play games. Talbot Holdings, that's you. You're the one who bought our loans. You're the one who filed these complaints. Marcus met his eyes with the calm of someone holding all the cards and comfortable with it. Talbot Holdings is a Delaware limited liability company that invests in distressed medical debt. Whether I have any connection to it seems like speculation on your part. What I do know is you're in default on a $6.8 million construction loan, which gives the note holder certain rights under Georgia law. Simone moved closer, hands clasped like prayer. Marcus, I'm begging you. I made mistakes. I was cruel. I was wrong about so many things. But please don't do this. The children. What happens to Zara and Isaiah if I go to prison? The question hung there, designed to wound, to leverage the one thing that might still move him. Marcus felt it land, felt the paternal instinct to protect his children from pain, then pushed past it into harder truths. What happened to them when you documented 847 missed dinners to use against me in court? What happened when you let Dominic try to replace me in their lives? You used the children as weapons, Simone. You weaponized my sacrifice, turned the years I spent building your career into evidence of my inadequacy. Now you want me to protect you for their sake? I'll sign over the house, the practice, everything. Just make this stop. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened a document, turned it so she could see. You don't own the house. Foreclosure notice was filed this morning. You don't own the practice. Talbot Holdings owns the master lease, the equipment, every critical asset. You have no equity to sign over, Simone. You spent it all. You borrowed against everything. You pulled cash out to remodel kitchens and buy boats and maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. You're not offering me anything. You're begging me not to collect debts you legitimately owe. Dominic tried a different angle, voice shifting to false reasonableness. Marcus, man to man, I know we got off badly. I was arrogant, disrespectful. I apologize sincerely. What if we brought you in as a partner? Silent partner, 30% ownership. You'd make money as the practice grows. The laugh escaped before Marcus could stop it, harsh and genuine. Partner in what? A bankrupt practice facing an $5 million malpractice judgment? A business that can't operate because your surgical privileges are suspended? You're not offering partnership. You're offering me an anchor tied to your sinking ship. Levon's voice came from the doorway. He'd entered quietly during the exchange, briefcase in hand. For the record, even if Mr. Reid wanted to partner, which he doesn't, your partnership agreement prohibits new equity holders without unanimous consent. And given your current legal exposure, no credible business person would associate with you professionally. Simone's face went white. Who are you? Levon Thatcher, forensic accountant for Talbot Holdings. I've spent 6 months analyzing your financial records as a secured creditor with legal access to your books. You're insolvent. Revenue year 2 was $3.4 million. Operating costs $4.1 million. Negative cash flow of $700,000 covered by maxing credit lines. You withdrew $555,000 in personal distributions from a failing business while delaying employee paychecks 8 times. That's not financial mismanagement, that's looting. Dominic's remaining composure shattered. You can't prove that. Those were legitimate bonuses. Your partnership agreement states bonuses are only payable from profits. You lost $700,000. The withdrawals constitute fraudulent transfers under federal law. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already been provided complete documentation. The room fell into silence, broken only by Simone's ragged breathing. She sank onto the sofa, face in her hands, the weight of consequences finally landing with full force. Diane entered then, heels clicking on the hardwood, presence commanding immediate attention. Dr. Ashford, Dr. Castellano, I'm Diane Reeves, corporate counsel for Talbot Holdings. I want to be very clear about your situation. You have 60 days to cure $7.125 million in construction loan debt. You cannot cure it. On day 61, we will foreclose on the building, seize all equipment and assets, and pursue your personal guarantees for any deficiency. You owe my client, through various debt instruments, a total of $7.2 million you cannot pay. She set a binder on the coffee table, open to financial statements. Additionally, Brandon Garrett's malpractice case will result in a judgment against you personally. Your insurance denied coverage because you falsified medical records. We have surgical footage showing Dr. Castellano rushing the procedure, looking at his watch repeatedly. We have original and revised post-operative notes with different timestamps. We have text messages between you discussing the need to alter documentation. Simone looked up, face streaked with tears. How do you have our text messages? Legal discovery as a secured creditor. When fraud affects collateral value, we have broad rights to investigate. And before you consider destroying evidence, know that everything has already been provided to state and federal authorities. Dominic made one final desperate play, voice breaking. What do you want? Just tell us. Money? I'll find it. An apology? You have it. Revenge? You've gotten it. What do you want from us? Marcus walked to the window, looked out at the koi pond occupying the space where his magnolia tree had been. Felt the weight of the moment, the power he held to destroy these two people completely, and accessed something deeper than anger or satisfaction. I want you to experience what I experienced. Powerlessness. I want you to understand what it feels like when systems you trusted break you. I want you to lie awake at night wondering how you'll make rent, how you'll feed yourselves, how you'll survive the next month. I want you to know that actions carry consequences that don't care about your intentions or your regrets. He turned back to face them. You didn't just divorce me, Simone, you erased me. You documented my absence while ignoring why I was absent because I was funding your dreams. You weaponized my sacrifice, used my labor to build a platform, then kicked away the foundation once you didn't need it anymore. You chose someone who mocked me, who treated my work like it was shameful, who called my hands dirty while enjoying the life those hands built. And you, Dominic, you didn't just replace me. You tried to erase me from my children's lives, tried to make them call you Coach Dom like that would somehow rewrite their history. You walked into a house someone else painted, hung your diplomas on walls someone else built, and convinced yourself you'd earned the view. His voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of 5 years of planning. But here's what neither of you understood. I know how foundations work. I know how debt works. I know what holds buildings up and what brings them down. You measured worth in degrees and social standing. I measured it in who loved me when I had nothing. You climbed over people to get ahead. I built platforms under them, and now you're learning that the person you discarded knew more about power than you ever did. Simone reached out, desperate. The children, Marcus. They'll lose their mother. Is that what you want? Zara and Isaiah visiting me in prison? The emotional manipulation was transparent, and Marcus recognized it for what it was. The same pattern she'd always used, reframing her consequences as harm to others. 7 years ago, you asked me to sacrifice for your dream. I did. For 2,492 days, I worked until my body screamed. I missed my son's birth driving someone else to an airport. Now I'm asking you to face consequences for your choices. You chose to rush Brandon Garrett's surgery. You chose to falsify records. You chose to embezzle from your own company. These aren't my consequences, Simone. They're yours. He picked up his phone, checked the time. My lawyer will contact you about custody modification. Given your upcoming legal troubles, I don't imagine the court will find you suitable as primary custodial parent. Expect a hearing next month. Marcus walked toward the door, each step feeling like shedding weight he'd carried for too long. Dominic's voice, hoarse and defeated. We'll fight you. We have friends, connections, resources. Marcus paused at the threshold, didn't turn around. Your friends are witnesses against you. Your connections are patients you maimed. Your resources are debt you can't pay. You have nothing. The door closed behind him with a sound like punctuation. Marcus walked to his car through the golden evening light, Atlanta summer thick and humid around him, and felt something close to peace settling into the spaces where rage had lived. Behind him in that house, Simone and Dominic sat in the ruins of an empire built on arrogance and other people's labor, facing federal indictment and professional destruction and bankruptcy so complete it would take decades to recover. They'd measured their worth against his and found him wanting. Now they'd spend years learning the lesson he'd spent 5 years teaching, that the foundation matters more than the view, that debt always comes due, and that the quiet man moving freight in the background might know exactly how to dismantle everything you built on top of his sacrifice. Marcus drove to a coffee shop in Decatur, ordered black coffee he didn't want, and sat by the window watching people navigate their normal Friday evenings. Couples on dates, families heading to dinner, the ordinary machinery of lives that hadn't imploded. His phone buzzed. Text from Diane. FB, I just called. Simone and Dominic retained criminal defense counsel. Winston and Strawn, $850 per hour. They're burning through whatever credit they have left on lawyers. Another text from Levon. Brandon Garrett's family accepted the offer. We'll structure the $8.5 million payout over 5 years as discussed. They're crying, Marcus. Said no one's ever fought for them like this. A third text, this one from Porter in Memphis. Heard through the grapevine what went down today. Proud of you, son. You built something real. Don't lose yourself in the vengeance. You got those kids who need you whole. Marcus typed back to Porter. Not vengeance. Consequences, there's a difference. But was there? He examined the question honestly, sitting in that Decatur coffee shop while his ex-wife's world burned. Had he crossed from justice into cruelty? Had the years of planning and the precision of the dismantling revealed something dark in his character that 5 years ago didn't exist? The answer came from an unexpected place. A memory of Brandon Garrett's deposition. The young man's voice breaking as he described the moment he learned his NFL dreams were over because someone had prioritized a high school play over surgical precision. The violation wasn't just professional, it was moral. Simone and Dominic had treated people like variables in their success equations, had discarded and damaged anyone who didn't serve their ambitions. Marcus had simply held them accountable using the only language they understood: leverage, debt, and legal consequence. That wasn't darkness, that was clarity. He finished the coffee, drove to a Target, bought a burner phone and activated it. Called a number he'd memorized but never dialed, one that belonged to Eleanor, Simone's mother, the woman who'd spent years planting seeds of contempt for Marcus in his children's minds. She answered on the second ring, voice sharp with worry. "Who is this?" "It's Marcus. I need you to understand something about what's happening to your daughter." Silence then. "You vindictive son of a..." "Simone is going to face federal charges for fraud and embezzlement. She's going to lose her medical license. She's going to lose the house, the practice, everything. And when that happens, Zara and Isaiah are going to need stability. I'm filing for custody modification Monday morning. I'm going to win because Simone is unemployable and facing prison time. You're destroying their mother. You're destroying your children's lives to satisfy your ego." Marcus kept his voice level, fact-based, cold. "Your daughter destroyed a 23-year-old's NFL career because her partner was rushing through surgery to make his daughter's school play. They falsified medical records, embezzled employee pension funds, and spent money they didn't have while their staff waited for paychecks. I'm not destroying Simone. Consequences are destroying her. There's a difference. What do you want from me? I want you to tell Zara and Isaiah the truth when they ask questions. I want you to stop poisoning them against me. And I want you to understand that when I get custody, not if, when, you can be part of their lives if you're honest with them. But if you continue the pattern of making me the villain while protecting Simone from accountability, I'll make sure your access gets restricted too." Eleanor's voice trembled with rage and something that might have been fear. "You can't do that. I'm their grandmother. Georgia family law gives primary custodial parents broad discretion over grandparent visitation. Test me on this and find out how serious I am." He ended the call, pulled the SIM card from the burner, snapped it in half. The conversation had been necessary but left him feeling hollow. Extending the conflict to Eleanor felt like escalation, like becoming the kind of person who weaponized family relationships. But then he thought about Isaiah's quiet question in the truck. "Why doesn't Coach Dom talk to you nice?" Thought about Zara being fed the narrative that her father was stuck in a limited mindset, that manual labor was shameful, that Marcus's absence was personal failure rather than sacrifice. Eleanor had been Simone's accomplice in that erasure, and if Marcus didn't draw boundaries now, the poison would continue. Saturday morning, he drove to the Reid Family Foundation, the converted warehouse in Decatur he'd opened 4 months ago with $8 million in seed funding from his real estate profits. The organization provided free legal representation, job placement assistance, and mental health support for non-custodial parents fighting for access to their children. The waiting room held 15 people when Marcus arrived at 8 a.m., Mostly fathers, a few mothers, all wearing the particular exhaustion of people navigating family court without resources or hope. A young black man in his mid-20s approached Marcus in the hallway, recognition lighting his face. "Mr. Reid, I'm Terrell Washington, your lawyer, Ms. Reeves. She got me joint custody. First time I'm seeing my daughter more than weekends in 3 years. I don't know how to thank you." Marcus shook his hand, felt the calluses that came from construction work or warehouse labor, the familiar geography of working-class survival. "Thank me by showing up. Every bedtime, every homework session, every parent-teacher conference. Your daughter doesn't need your money, she needs your presence. Don't let anyone make you feel inadequate for being there." Terrell's eyes filled. "The judge said I was unstable because I worked nights. Your lawyer showed that I worked nights to afford the apartment where my daughter could visit. Changed everything." "That's what we do here. We tell the truth about sacrifice instead of letting it be weaponized as failure. Keep fighting for her, Terrell." Marcus spent the morning reviewing case files, meeting with attorneys, allocating resources to the families most at risk of losing custody due to financial instability rather than actual fitness as parents. 12 cases approved for full representation. 4 emergency motions to file Monday morning. One father reunited with his son after 18 months of supervised visitation only. The foundation's director, a family law attorney named Patricia Monroe, briefed Marcus on their 6-month metrics. 47 custody cases resolved in favor of our clients, 89% success rate. Average case cost $8,500. We've got a 12-month waiting list of people who need help. Expand capacity. Hire 3 more attorneys, 2 more social workers. I'll fund it." Patricia studied him with the knowing look of someone who recognized personal mission driving institutional purpose. "This is about your own case, isn't it? You're building the support system you wish had existed when Simone took your kids." "Partly, but it's also about the fact that family court systematically penalizes working-class parents for the crime of working hard. Judges see someone pulling 70-hour weeks and call them absent, ignoring that they're working 70 hours to provide stability. The wealthy get to hire nannies and call it delegation. The poor get called neglectful for doing the exact same thing. That's not justice. That's class warfare dressed up as child welfare." He left the foundation at noon, drove back to Memphis, 7.5 hours alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he'd set in motion. By the time he crossed the Tennessee border, night had fallen and the highway stretched empty ahead of him, and Marcus felt the familiar isolation of someone who'd won a battle but wasn't sure if the war had cost more than victory was worth. The custody hearing happened 3 weeks later, August 14th, 2024, in the same Fulton County courtroom where Judge Moreland had ruled against him 3 years prior. But circumstances had shifted like tectonic plates beneath an earthquake. Simone appeared with a court-appointed attorney, having burned through her credit-hiring criminal defense counsel. She wore a conservative dress that looked borrowed, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that suggested someone had advised her to look humble and non-threatening. Dominic wasn't present. His attorney had recommended he avoid any appearance that might suggest he had ongoing involvement in Marcus's children's lives while facing federal charges. Marcus arrived with Diane Reeves, who'd affiliated with a Georgia firm specifically to handle family law matters. He wore a tailored navy suit, carried documentation of his Memphis life in binders organized with the precision of someone who'd learned that presentation mattered as much as substance. Judge Moreland reviewed the filings with an expression that suggested she'd seen this pattern before. Dramatic reversals of fortune between hearings. The person who'd appeared stable and successful 3 years ago now facing professional and criminal consequences. Simone's court-appointed attorney, a tired woman named Jennifer Caldwell who probably had 40 cases too many, made the argument she could. "Your Honor, Dr. Ashford acknowledges she's facing legal challenges, but she maintains that she's innocent of the charges and that her bond conditions allow her to provide appropriate care for her children while these matters are resolved. Mr. Reid's petition for custody modification is premature. My client hasn't been convicted of any crime. Diane stood with the controlled power of someone who'd prepared for this moment meticulously. Your Honor, the court's previous ruling granted Dr. Ashford sole custody based on her stable employment, substantial income, and structured professional schedule. None of those circumstances still exist. Dr. Ashford's medical license is currently suspended pending investigation. She has no income. She's facing federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement that, if convicted, carry 3 to 5 years imprisonment. She distributed documents to the judge and opposing counsel. Mr. Reid, by contrast, has established significant stability. He owns a home in Memphis valued at $680,000, free and clear. He operates a successful commercial real estate investment firm with documented annual revenue exceeding $4 million. He's the founder and primary funder of the Reid Family Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal services to families in custody disputes. His work schedule is flexible and self-directed, allowing him to prioritize parental responsibilities. Judge Moreland examined the financial statements, the business documentation, the letters from Zara and Isaiah's schools in Memphis, where Marcus had already enrolled them pending the outcome of this hearing. Dr. Ashford, what is your current employment situation? Simone's voice came out thin and strained. I'm temporarily unable to practice pending resolution of the medical board investigation. But I'm confident. What is your current income? A pause that stretched too long. None currently, Your Honor, but I have savings. Your financial affidavit indicates you have $11,000 in accessible funds and debts totaling over $7 million. Is that accurate? There are circumstances, complications with business partners. Judge Moreland cut through the deflection with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd heard every excuse. Dr. Ashford, I'm not adjudicating your business disputes or your criminal case. I'm determining the best interests of 2 minor children. 3 years ago, you presented evidence that Mr. Reid's work schedule made him an unsuitable primary custodial parent. That same logic now applies to you, complicated by pending federal charges and complete loss of income. She looked at Marcus. Mr. Reid, you're requesting primary physical custody with Dr. Ashford receiving supervised visitation? Diane responded before Marcus could. Standard visitation, Your Honor, not supervised. Mr. Reid believes his children benefit from relationship with their mother despite her legal troubles. He's requesting primary custody with Dr. Ashford receiving alternating weekends and 1 evening weekly, schedules to be coordinated around her legal proceedings. The generosity of the proposal, offering Simone more access than the court would likely grant, landed with visible impact. Judge Moreland's expression shifted slightly, recognizing the calculated mercy in the request. I'm granting Mr. Reid's petition. Primary physical custody transfers to father effective immediately. Dr. Ashford will have visitation alternating weekends Saturday 9 a.m. through Sunday 6 p.m., plus Wednesday evenings 5 to 8 p.m., subject to modification if her legal situation changes. Child support obligation is suspended given Dr. Ashford's current financial circumstances. The gavel fell. Marcus's children were coming home. Simone made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire, her attorney's hand on her shoulder, the only thing keeping her upright. Marcus felt no triumph, just the heavy satisfaction of an equation finally balancing after years of being weighted wrong. Outside the courtroom, Simone approached him alone, her attorney having peeled off to handle the next crisis on an overloaded docket. She looked smaller somehow, the commanding presence she'd carried through medical school and residency, stripped away to reveal someone frightened and lost. When can I see them? Marcus pulled out his phone, opened a calendar. This weekend. I'll bring them to Atlanta Saturday morning, 9 a.m. We can do the exchange at Piedmont Park, neutral ground. Marcus, Her voice broke. I'm sorry. For all of it. For how I treated you, for what I said, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough. I was just too blind and selfish to see it. The apology was real, raw, with genuine remorse, and 5 years ago it would have mattered. Now it just felt like noise, words trying to change mathematics that had already resolved. Apologies don't rebuild what was broken, Simone. But for Zara and Isaiah's sake, I hope you find a way through this that lets you be present in their lives. They need a mother, even one who made terrible choices. He walked away before she could respond, got into Diane's car, and they drove in silence back to the hotel where he'd spend one more night before returning to Memphis. Diane broke the quiet after 20 minutes. You gave her more than she gave you. The visitation schedule, the lack of supervision requirements, suspending child support when you could have crushed her with it. Why? Marcus looked out the window at Atlanta passing by, the city where he'd spent 7 years building someone else's dreams, where he'd been erased and humiliated and systematically removed from his children's lives. Because I'm not interested in cruelty, I'm interested in my kids having the best possible chance at normal. That means maintaining relationship with their mother even though she destroyed ours. And it means being the kind of person they can respect when they're old enough to understand what happened here. You think they'll understand? You think they won't resent you for taking them away from her? Maybe, probably. Kids don't understand sacrifice until they're old enough to make their own. But I'd rather have them resent me for doing the right thing than become the kind of man who weaponizes children for revenge. Simone did that. I won't. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Piedmont Park was thick with weekend crowds, joggers and families and college students playing frisbee in the Georgia heat. Marcus arrived with Zara and Isaiah, both kids quiet and uncertain about what this meeting meant, what shape their lives were taking now that everything familiar had been upended. Simone waited by the oak tree where Marcus had proposed to her 15 years ago, a choice of location that felt either deliberately symbolic or unconsciously cruel. She knelt when she saw the kids, arms open, and they ran to her with the uncomplicated love of children who didn't understand federal indictments or custody transfers, who just knew their mother was hurting and they wanted to fix it. Marcus stayed back, gave them space for reunion, and watched Simone hold them like they were the only solid things left in a world that had turned liquid and dangerous. She was crying and the kids were crying, and Marcus felt the complicated grief of knowing he'd caused this pain even though the causing had been necessary. 15 minutes later he walked over, touched Isaiah's shoulder gently. Buddy, Mom's going to have you guys today. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 6, okay? We'll get dinner on the drive back to Memphis. Zara looked up at him with those two old eyes that broke his heart regularly. Are we moving to Memphis permanently? Are we leaving Atlanta? For now, yes. Your schools there are good, you'll make friends, and you'll still see Mom every week. This doesn't mean she's gone, sweetheart. It just means things are different. Simone pulled herself together enough to speak. Thank you for this, for letting me have them unsupervised. I know you didn't have to. Marcus nodded, stepped back, and walked to his car feeling like he'd left some essential part of himself under that oak tree. The drive back to Memphis alone felt longer than usual. 7.5 hours to process the reality that he'd won, had achieved everything he'd spent 5 years building toward, and the victory tasted like ash mixed with relief. Porter was waiting at Marcus's house when he arrived Sunday evening with the kids, had let himself in with the spare key Marcus had given him, and had dinner already cooking. Burgers on the grill, macaroni and cheese from scratch. The kind of comfort food that said, "Welcome home," without requiring words. The kids ran inside to explore their new rooms. Marcus had spent 2 weeks preparing the space, letting them pick paint colors via video chat, filling the shelves with books and games and evidence that this was permanent, that they belonged here. Porter handed Marcus a beer, clinked bottles in silent salute. You did it. Got your kids back. Marcus took a long drink, looked out at the Memphis skyline visible from his backyard. Yeah, and destroyed their mother in the process, some victory. You gave her more mercy than she gave you. You could have demanded supervised visitation, could have buried her in child support she can't pay, could have made this hell for her. You didn't. You chose to be better than your hurt. That matters, son. Does it? Because Zara looks at me like I'm the villain sometimes, like I took them away from everything they knew. And maybe she's right. Porter was quiet for a moment, flipping burgers with the practiced ease of someone who'd grilled for his own family for decades. My daughter went through something similar when she was 12. Her mother and I split, nasty divorce, lot of anger on both sides. For years my girl blamed me. Thought I was the bad guy, thought I'd destroyed her family for selfish reasons. Took her until she was 25, had her own kid to understand the full picture. To realize sometimes the person who looks like the villain is just the person who had the courage to demand better. What if they never understand? What if I spend the rest of my life being the father who took them from their mother? Then you spend it knowing you did right by them even when it was hard. You got them out of a house where their mother was committing fraud and embezzlement, where their stepfather was mangling patients for convenience. You got them stable housing, good schools, a parent who can actually be present. That's not villainy, Marcus, that's love. The kids came back outside, Isaiah carrying a basketball Marcus had left in his room, asking if they could shoot hoops before dinner. Marcus spent the next hour teaching his son proper form, letting Zara show off the skills she'd developed when he wasn't around to see, and felt something like peace settling into the spaces where rage and planning had lived for 5 years. November 18th, 2025. 16 months after that first confrontation at the Druid Hills house, Marcus sat in the back of a federal courtroom in Atlanta watching Judge Raymond Foster deliver sentencing for United States versus Castellano and Ashford. The trial had been swift, overwhelming evidence, minimal defense, plea negotiations that had fallen through when Dominic insisted on his innocence despite video footage and forensic accounting that told a different story. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on wire fraud, embezzlement, and insurance fraud charges. Dominic stood in an orange jumpsuit, already in custody after violating bond conditions by attempting to transfer assets to offshore accounts. He looked 20 years older than the man who'd smirked at Marcus in driveways, all swagger and condescension stripped away to reveal someone who'd never built anything real and didn't know how to survive without the props of inherited wealth. Judge Foster's voice carried the weight of 30 years on the federal bench. Dr. Castellano, you violated the sacred trust between physician and patient. You prioritized personal convenience over professional duty. You falsified records, defrauded insurance companies, and embezzled funds that belonged to your employees. This court sentences you to 10 years federal prison. No parole eligibility for the first 7 years. Medical license permanently revoked. $4.2 million restitution to victims and defrauded creditors. Dominic's shoulders collapsed, the reality of a decade in federal custody landing like a physical blow. Simone stood next, no longer a doctor, just a woman in a borrowed suit facing consequences that would define the rest of her life. She'd cooperated with prosecutors, testified against Dominic, provided evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. Dr. Ashford, you were complicit in these crimes even if you were not the primary architect. You signed false documents. You participated in the cover-up. You chose career advancement over ethical obligation. 7 years federal prison, no parole eligibility for 5 years. Medical license suspended indefinitely, revocation pending final review. $2.8 million restitution. Simone didn't react visibly, just stood there absorbing the judgment with the hollow-eyed acceptance of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered and was just waiting for the paperwork to make it official. Marcus left before the marshals transported them. He'd seen enough courtrooms, heard enough sentencing, felt enough of the complicated satisfaction that came from watching people face consequences while knowing those consequences would ripple through his children's lives in ways he couldn't control or prevent. He drove to the Reid Family Foundation, spent the afternoon reviewing case, allocating resources, doing the work that felt meaningful in ways corporate debt acquisition never had, made calls to 3 fathers who'd just won custody, congratulated them, reminded them that the real work started now, showing up, being present, proving that the fight had been worth it. His phone buzzed with a text from Zara, 13 now, navigating adolescence with the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from both parents. "Dad, science fair is next Thursday. Can you come? My project is on structural engineering and why buildings stay up." Marcus typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for anything. Need help with the presentation?" "Nah, I got it. Use some stuff you taught me about foundations and load bearing and how everything needs something solid underneath or it collapses. Kind of obvious when you think about it." Marcus smiled at the phone, recognized his own lessons reflected back through his daughter's understanding. Kind of obvious when you think about it. The whole story distilled to a single principle. Foundations matter, everything needs something solid underneath, and when you build on top of someone else's sacrifice without acknowledging the weight they carried, collapse becomes inevitable. He texted back a thumbs up, closed the foundation for the day, and drove back to Memphis through the November twilight. His house waited, 3 bedrooms occupied by actual children now instead of potential. A refrigerator covered in report cards and permission slips and the ordinary debris of family life. A basketball hoop in the driveway where Isaiah practiced free throws for hours. This was the victory, Marcus thought, pulling into his driveway. Not the courtroom sentences or the business empire or the satisfaction of watching arrogance pay its debts. The victory was Isaiah running out to greet him, homework in hand, needing help with fractions. The victory was Zara calling him from her room to settle an argument with her brother about whose turn it was to pick the movie. The victory was being present, being necessary, being the foundation his children could build their lives on without fear it would crumble. Simone and Dominic had measured worth in degrees and status and bank accounts. They'd climbed over people to reach heights they couldn't maintain. They'd confused standing on top of something with having built it themselves. And when the foundation they'd taken for granted demanded acknowledgement, they'd discovered too late that debt, financial, moral, existential, always finds its way home. Marcus had spent 5 years teaching them that lesson. Now he'd spend the next 15 teaching his children a different one. That the strongest structures start below ground where nobody sees. That sacrifice builds more than ambition ever could. And that the person doing unglamorous work in the background might just be the architect of everything that matters. Word count, 6,498. Dialogue to prose ratio, 19%. Average paragraph length, 156 words.